Welcome to Go Vote Omaha, presented by the League of Women Voters of Greater Omaha. I'm Geri Simon, a League member and your host. Each program we talk about issues that are important for elections. We hope that you'll discuss those same issues, and then when election time comes, we want to help you be ready and willing to go vote. This is the first in a series on the death penalty. The death penalty was abolished by the Nebraska legislature in 2015, but there were enough signatures gathered to put it to a vote to the people. So it will be on the ballot this November as to whether we will retain LB 268, which abolished the death penalty, or not. And this evening, we're going to talk about morality and justice and the death penalty. Our guest is Marylyn Felion. She's the office manager for Retain a Just Nebraska, which is a group working to retain LB 268, which abolished the death penalty. She also accompanied the last person to be executed in the state of Nebraska, and she's worked for many years on abolishing the death penalty. Welcome, Marilyn.
Thank you.
Marilyn, let's have you talk a little bit about your background and how you began working on the death penalty.
Well, I was a teacher for many years, first of all, and then after a trip to Nicaragua, I began being more involved with social justice and issues of peace. And it wasn't until the night that Willie Otay was killed, when I stood outside the penitentiary and saw the awful, awful scene that was going on that night of people, young people drinking and shouting barbecue and fry him and so on. I decided I was never going to get to know a death row inmate, because if it was that awful when I didn't even know the person, I couldn't imagine what it would be like if I knew the person who was being executed, or, God forbid, even came to like this person. So I was staying away from anything like that. Until the following year, when Robert Williams was supposed to be executed, but there was a last-minute stay of execution, and I was so relieved that I sent a note to him, and Robert wrote back. And so we exchanged letters, but I didn't go see him. We exchanged letters for 2.5 years until the day that I picked up the newspaper and saw that he had been given an execution date. And then I just felt like I should at least ask if he would like for me to come visit him. And after his execution then, after having witnessed this whole process, I just really felt that, you know, most people are good people. I think most people who had been through that experience would never, ever, ever want that to happen again. So I have really been working since then to make sure that that never happens again in Nebraska.
Okay. Well, you talked about your experience with Robert Williams, who was the last person to be executed in the state in 1997.
Yes.
In a very powerful video called Stones,
Yes,
by the filmmaker Nico Sandy.
Yes.
And we have permission to show that to our viewers. And before we talk more about the death penalty, let's take a look at that video now.
Robert was born in 1936. He was the oldest of 7 children. The family lived in a little basement room, one room, with unfinished walls and dirt floors. And Robert would see his mother yelling and screaming at the dad because of spending the money, and Dad beating his mother again. And finally, after a period of time, the older boys prevailed upon their mother to leave because they were afraid she was going to be killed. Child Protective Services came and took the children away, but Robert was old enough that he could not be taken.
The death penalty has been an issue for Nebraska legislators for many years.
Senator Ernie Chambers, for a number of years, has sponsored an abolitionist bill to try and rid the state of Nebraska from capital punishment as an option.
Finally, this last spring, he was successful in getting it passed.
And went to the governor, and the governor vetoed it. So then it came back to the legislature, and we had to get 30 votes to put the repeal into effect, overriding the veto. So it passed, notwithstanding the opposition of the veto of the governor, and went into law in session.
got a job in Lincoln, married a wife, they were buying a house. One of the things he didn't realize was that he was not emotionally able to have intimate relationship with somebody. And this was interfering with his relationship with his wife. Finally, one day, his wife served him divorce papers. And that just snapped something inside of him.
After the governor's veto was overridden, the question is, what can you do next? And the next step was to start a citizen petition drive. Those drives usually aren't successful unless you have money for paid petitioners and money for advertising.
Governor Ricketts and I believe his father donated several $100,000 along with other primarily conservative groups to try and get enough signatures to make this a ballot initiative.
And they have turned in a sufficient number of signatures to put the issue on the ballot. So the issue will be on the ballot in November 2016.
And he walked off the job and he spent the day drinking and drugging and went to the home of some friends of his, and he had a gun. And they tried to get the gun away from him, and he ended up shooting and killing both of them. He raped one and then got into his car and was on his way to Chicago, but he was under the influence and he kept driving the car off the road, and finally he wrecked the car, so he went looking for another car. And he encountered a farm wife and raped her and killed her and stole that car and came back to Lincoln, where he was picked up and put in jail.
The people who were arguing against the repeal, who argued that we needed to keep the death penalty, talked about their understanding of justice. It was a reciprocity understanding of justice. If someone killed someone in a particularly horrendous way, that justice demanded the ultimate punishment.
The kind of eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth thing. You killed, you must be killed. That's not in keeping with our understanding of universal human dignity, and we believe that justice can be better served by preserving the life even of the most heinous criminal, as long as society can be protected from that person, which our modern prison systems can do.
Victims' families have reported overwhelmingly not feeling a sense of relief, not feeling peace once their family member's killer is executed. So we really don't have any evidence that that retributive aspect is going to bring something like a peacefulness or any sort of equilibrium either to victims' families or to society in general.
So there, I think they give the most powerful testimony against the death penalty. We have suffered from a murder, and we don't think killing the murderer is going to do anything for us. Quite the opposite. It's insulting to think that causing other people to suffer is going to make us feel any better.
He spent 20 years on death row. He spent a lot of time trying to understand how come other people who had grown up like he did, he knew there were a lot of people that lived in the poverty and the violence and so on that he had. How come so many of these people made it and he didn't? What was the difference? He would get up like at 3 o'clock every morning and spend hours reading and studying and praying. And he came to be, he was 61 at the time, he came to be just this very dear, kind elderly grandfather sort of person.
Nebraska, however, is ranked dead last by quite a margin in terms of the amount of reparations that they give per victims. They give less than $100, average of less than $100, around $60-some per victim, and the next lowest state is several $100s.
So on the repeal side, there were multiple justice arguments that were important in the debate. One was the justice argument about the fundamental value of human life. A government should not take a human life unless that's absolutely necessary.
Vision of justice that is based on restoration of relationships rather than simply retribution. So the phrase is restorative justice. That would suggest that the person who's committed the crime would have some opportunity and obligation to, as much as possible, make amends for the harm they've caused.
Every year on the anniversary of the day that these killings happened was a day of great sorrow for Robert, and all of his friends would join with him, you know, in praying for the consolation of these families. He was indeed very sorry for what he had done, very sorry for the grief that he had brought upon these families. September of 1997, when I picked up the morning paper and saw on the front page that the Nebraska Supreme Court had set a date for his execution. And by then, you know, we had become friends. And he was executed on December 2nd. Robert prayed and prayed and prayed that his execution would be the last state-ordered killing.
That truly is a powerful film. And at the crux of the film, it seems to be how we understand justice. And for many, it seems, especially those who want to reinstate the death penalty, they're really looking at the eye for an eye type of justice.
Right.
Would you talk about that a little bit and why you think that's a flawed view?
You know, if we go with an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, as somebody said once, the whole world will be blind and toothless. That simply perpetuates the violence. And studies have shown that in places where, for example, there is no death penalty, if there is that kind of respect for life, then the attitude changes. And there's something that is then more across the board respectful of life. What was the rest of that?
Well, I wondered why, I mean, I think you touched on why that's a flawed view, that you're talking about the respect for life. So let's talk about the other possibility for justice, which is restorative justice. Would you explain what that means?
Well, that's the opposite then. That would mean that instead of trying to exact vengeance for something that has been done, the purpose of this kind of justice is to restore a balance in society, and also to the victim of whatever injustice has been perpetrated. So if there's an injustice, then you restore justice by doing something positive rather than negative, in this instance of taking another life.
Okay. And one thing I think might be hard to distinguish, or maybe it's not, are justice and punishment, are they the same thing or are they different? Are we talking about two different things?
Justice and punishment. Well, I would say that justice is restoring a balance. Punishment for the sake of punishment is vengeance, and vengeance is not anything positive. Vengeance usually just continues to perpetrate the violence that was done in the first place. According to the teachings of my faith, the Roman Catholic Church, for example, capital punishment is never, ever permitted if it is in response to something that has been done, if it's punishment. To take another person's life as punishment is forbidden. To take a person's life if it is necessary to defend society is different than taking a person's life as punishment. And my own personal feeling about that is, it seems to me that the death penalty says more about us than it does about the person in the death chamber. People have said to me, but this person did this terrible, awful thing. He deserves it. And my response is, well, that might be, but we don't deserve it. we do not deserve the injustice, it seems to me, of taking another person's life. We already agree that taking somebody's life is not right. So why in the world would taking a second life make it any better?
So really you're talking about that they're supporting revenge or retribution
Right,
for
right.
taking a life or
Yes.
murder, killing
Right.
someone else.
And again, that just perpetuates the violence. And
Okay.
as long as we're perpetuating violence, then we never get out of the cycle of violence. The only way to get out of a cycle of violence is to break the cycle.
Okay. Then you're also saying then that that's not justice, but it's that retribution or the revenge is not justice, the punishment. Okay. I think you talked a little bit about how one's religion affects your view of the death penalty.
Mm-hmm.
And are there differences? Do most religious faiths, are they supportive of repeal of the death penalty?
I believe they are, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And what about forgiveness for a crime? How does that fit into justice and the death penalty?
You know, forgiveness is something that a person has to come to in his or her own way, in his or her own heart. It's really not something that can be imposed. But there are a lot of ways that we can help do that. And I think that practicing restorative justice would be one way to help, because this gives time and it gives an opportunity for people to respond to each other in a way that is other than simply victim and perpetrator. If there is an effort at restoring a balance, then two people can. I have heard many stories of murder victims' family members who have had the opportunity and responded in a way that it has been very healing for the person as well as for the perpetrator to realize, to be able to have a chance to realize that he or she has done something that has really, really, really been hurtful. And to be able to restore that balance that had been broken.
Okay. It's often said that the punishment, we talked about punishment, but punishment should fit the crime.
Mm-hmm.
And some would say that serving life term in prison without parole and not putting them to death is really more of a punishment than if you executed the person. What do you say to that particular point of view?
Well, that could be, but you know, it doesn't have to be like that. I mean, there are other countries in the world in which the emphasis is on restoring this person, restoring the person to health, and then restoring them to a point where they're able to make a real contribution to society. Even if they're in prison, they may be able to do work such that they are being a productive member of society. And that's better than wasting another life.
Okay. And the film talks about reparations to families.
Yes.
And that Nebraska doesn't do very much in terms of a monetary reparation. What about what life in prison or no execution does for families seeking peace or justice for the murder of one of their own?
Well, you know, as it said in the film, for many people, if there's a death sentence hanging over their heads, and it's hanging over the head of the family as well as the perpetrator, you know, then this is something that just causes endless pain. If you're waiting and waiting and waiting for an execution to bring closure, which never happens, then it just, again, it's just a spiral. It just makes it worse all the time. If a person is spending a lifetime in prison, then there is some closure for the family. There is that this person is being locked up, and they're not going to be hearing about this in the paper all the time. They're not going to be seeing this reenacted on TV over and over. And hopefully then this gives the family and the family members a chance to heal. In the case of Robert, When Robert spent time dealing with the terrible things that he had done, he really did reach out to the families. And there was settlement there with 2 of the families of his victims who wrote to him and who visited him. The 3rd family, he wasn't able to achieve that, although the husband of the 3rd woman was there as a state's witness when Robert was executed. And so Robert was able then to say again, to look at this person and to say again, to ask for forgiveness and to say how sorry he was, and to tell this gentleman that he loved him.
And Robert was a person who spent, how many years was he actually on death row before he was executed?
I believe it was 20.
20, that's a long time. So, and as you said, he has had a long time to reflect and to, he really, as the film said, was really trying to understand why he lashed out and killed people rather than some others who came from the same background.
Right.
Do you, and you were his spiritual director, so what did that mean?
I was his spiritual advisor.
Advisor,
yes,
okay.
Right. That meant that I listened. I did a lot of listening.
Okay.
And I sort of became his father confessor, I think, or mother confessor. And he was able then, you know, he was able to tell me the things that he had been through while he was in prison and how he had studied and prayed, how he had searched and searched and searched to find out why it was that other people who had lived in violence and poverty and abuse, he had been very abused as a child, how they were able to manage, you know, and live productive lives, and how come that hadn't happened with him. And he searched for the answer, and I asked him if he ever found it, and he said yes. And I asked him what it was, and he said self-knowledge.
Okay. What was it like that day, that last day?
How much time do we have?
We just have a few minutes, but
Okay.
if you can.
Okay.
I mean, I can feel my heart start pounding
Yeah.
just thinking about.
You know, it was very surreal, very Kafkaesque, walking back into that prison where I had been visiting with Robert, where I had seen how Robert he was 61 years old when he was executed, as I said on the film. He was this kind, grandfatherly person. The guards really loved Robert. There would be times when I was visiting when they would stick their heads in the doors and they would just say, "Robert, we're praying, we're praying. No execution." And so on that day, it was really, really hard for the guards. It was just, they had to keep their distance. They had to, you know, and there was one guard at one time that just broke ranks, that came to him and put her arms around him and said, "I could get in trouble for this, but I can't not tell you goodbye." When there was a period of time when I had to leave the room while they prepared him, while they shaved and diapered him. And I was sitting in the hallway then waiting, and I was feeling great, great anxiety and discomfort and really just miserable. And I started to pray. And all of a sudden, it was as if I could feel all of this anxiety and this worry and this grief just pouring out of me, down my legs and feet and into the floorboards. And in came this very, very deep, strong peace and strength. And that was then how I was able to continue with Robert. We went down the hall. First, he had a press conference in which he forgave the Pardons Board. He pardoned the Pardons Board and forgave everybody who was involved with this. He was very much opposed to capital punishment, but he was very much at peace with his own. In fact, he overslept on the morning of his execution. So anyway, we went down the hall. I was saying the prayer of St. Francis, and I paraphrased it. "Robert, our God has made you an instrument of God's peace. Where there was hatred, you showed love," etc. We got to the elevator, and as we were going down the elevator, we were holding hands, and we began singing, "Oh, freedom, before I'll be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free." When we got to the elevator door opened, there was the room in which he was pushed, and I came this way, and I had to go past the guards who had escorted us. And that's when I realized that the guards were sobbing. This is very, very hard. It's very unfair. If we say an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, if we were going to punish a rapist, would we hire somebody to come rape the rapist? Why do we hire people to come kill someone who has killed? That's not what they're paid for, and that's very, very difficult for people to do this. To strap somebody down who is alive and healthy and then kill them.
So you could talk about it in the abstract, but when you're describing the actual moment of being there, it seems a very, very different thing.
It was. Something I'll never forget. And as I said in the beginning, I think most people are good people. Having gone through this, they would never want this to happen again.
Right.
And as it says on the tape, the night before he died, he prayed and prayed that his would be the last state-ordered killing. And so far
it has
is.
been.
Yes.
So if viewers want to ensure that it's the last time, you would vote to retain on the ballot proposal.
That's right.
On the ballot for keeping the repeal of the death penalty.
Yes.
Marilyn, thank you for being with us and talking about this. Appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
For the League of Women Voters, I'm Geri Simon, reminding you to inform yourself about the issues, and at election time, go vote Omaha.